Hey everyone, Destroyer here. This is going to be the review and comparison video for the Yugoslavian and Russian SKS. This is one of the first videos that will actually be shown that was a result of the viewers choosing which review they wanted to see. Excellent choice, by the way. So let's get right into it. As you can see here, the top one is the Russian-made SKS, and the bottom is the Yugoslavian-made SKS. Obviously, there are differences. The Yugoslavian model is sporting the Tapco stock with the collapsible buttstock, and the Russian SKS is sporting the Monte Carlo style stock. As you can see, the Russian model still has its factory 10-round box magazine. The Yugoslavian has been upgraded to accept the 20-round Tapco magazines. So there's going to be a little bit of difference in weight between the two, and also a little bit of difference in how smoothly they operate. So let's take a look. As you can see, the Russian SKS weighs in at about 9 pounds. And it looks like the Yugoslavian model weighs in at 10 pounds, so it's about 1 pound heavier than the Russian model. So now what I'm going to do is give you guys a rough idea of how long these rifles are, from top to the buttstock. We'll start with the Yugoslavian model. Now we'll measure the length of the Russian model. So to make things nice and easy, I figured we'd start going from top to bottom, just kind of how we did with measuring the length. So to start out with, you'll notice that the Yugoslavian model actually has a flash suppressor that's been tack welded on. The Russian model does not. Take that however you like. I like the fact that the flash suppressor is on there. I think it, one, makes it look cooler. Two, it is functional. It does reduce some of the muzzle flash. Is it necessary? That's debatable. Next, we've got our bayonets here. Now, on the Russian bayonet, you can actually remove it. Now, this may not be the case on all of the Russian bayonets. If you look, there's actually marks on both of these where it's actually been staked, so that you can't actually remove the bayonet easily without drilling this out or punching it out. On the Russian one, that's no longer a problem. On the Yugo, it actually is a problem because you can't remove the bayonet. However, in order to stay 922R compliant on the SKS, you don't want to remove the bayonet anyways. Now the interesting thing on the two bayonets is, one, you'll notice that the bayonet is longer on the Yugoslavian model, which I like. The thing I don't like is it appears to be a little bit more inferior of a metal than the Russian model, and not quite as nicely built. Again, that's going to be your difference in quality between the two. The other thing I found interesting was the locking mechanism on the bayonet themselves. You'll notice here on the Russian model, there's a nice heavy-duty ring here that when you fold this bayonet out, locks over the barrel up against the actual front sight. On the Yugoslavian model, the bayonet actually comes up, and this lip here locks in right here. So honestly, it really depends. I could see a potential issue down the road if you hit something hard enough to mess up the front sight block here, but that would take quite a bit of force, honestly. It seems more stable on the Russian model than it does on the Yugoslavian model, just because of the fact that the only thing really holding the Yugoslavian model in place is this ring and this little metal lip here. overall, I would say the durability factor is probably going to go in favor of the Russian model because of this nice reinforced steel ring here. Moving right along, I'm going to stop here at the front sight block. The interesting thing here is the Russian model has a traditional style SKS sight block. The Yugoslavian model does too, except for the fact that right here it has a night sight with a white dot that you can flip up for if you're shooting in low light conditions. Before we get to the gas block, you'll notice there's nothing here on the Russian model. Here you've actually got grenade launcher sights. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? Now the interesting thing on this particular Yugoslavian model is the gas regulator had to be replaced up here. And normally what happens is you have a gas regulator switch here. When it's turned all the way to the right, it allows the Yugoslavian model to function normally in semi-automatic. When you switch it up top, so the push button is actually straight up, it will only cycle one shot at a time. And it was designed this way intentionally, so that if the Yugoslavians needed to launch a grenade, they could. They would affix it to the end of the barrel here, the grenade that is, and what they would do is clear the chamber and the box magazine of any ammo, close it all up, they would load in a gas blank round, and the gas from it would actually propel the grenade. And so when the gas selector is in front, completely up top here, the grenade sights are actually released. Now on mine, you permanently can't use the grenade sights because I ended up having to switch out the gas selector on mine. And the particular model that I went with, since I wasn't going to use the grenade sights, it was more durable, but it prevented you from actually removing that gas selector. So that brings us right to the gas tube. That is a story in and of itself. When I first got this Yugoslavian SKS, I could not get it to function reliably in semi-automatic. I spent hours combing the online gun forums trying to get an idea of what the problem was. I came to the conclusion that for some reason or another there was a gas leak in here, right where the selector and the tube mate together. Because you can't see it, but inside this tube there's actually a lip recessed in the gas tube opening about 1/16 of an inch in. And then the gas selector itself sticks out a little bit from the housing, and so the tube is supposed to come over the extended gas selector but up against the housing and create a nice seal. Mine wasn't doing that. So what I ended up having to do was take a very tiny paper clip, wrap it around the diameter of this gas tube here, all the way around, and I clipped off about 1/8 of an inch to leave a little bit of gap so the pressure wouldn't spike too much. And I just stuck it on the inside lip, put it around the gas selector, butted it up, locked it in, and I haven't had a problem since then. So it's a great fix if you own a Yugoslavian SKS model and are having that issue. Now the cool thing is, the Russian model, when we were testing the gas leaks on the Yugoslavian model, we thought it originally was an issue with the gas tube itself. So what we did was we took the gas tube and actually put it on the Russian model. And oddly enough, even though there is a different design behind the Yugoslavian gas tube, it actually worked fine without any issues on the Russian model. However, the Russian model would not work with the Yugoslavian, so that was interesting as well. Now the rear sight block on both of these is slightly different in the markings as well, but there's not really a huge difference in terms of how it elevates the actual sight. And then next, you'll see that the Russian model still has the original 10-round box magazine on it. It will accept the Tapco 20-round magazines. However, the owner decided to go back to the 10-round because honestly, the Tapco magazines don't always feed reliably. The major difference in the chamber between the Yugoslavian and the Russian model is the Russian model will accept the hollow point, full metal jacket, and soft point rounds without any real issues. The Yugoslavian model that I have had to be sanded a little around the edges of the actual chamber in order to get the hollow points to feed fairly reliably. Every once in a while there's still an issue, but not the way it used to be where each one would jam and smush and it was a mess. The materials used in the construction of the chamber are of a much higher quality in the Russian model than the Yugoslavian. If you look in the Russian model, it's very nice, well built, smooth edges for the most part. However, you look at the Yugoslavian model and you notice that there's a crack right in here. I honestly don't see it as a major issue in my opinion. However, it does attest to the quality of the Russian manufacturing versus the Yugoslavian manufacturing. The SKS is a much more inexpensive rifle by comparison to an AR-15 or an AK-47. So if you're looking at getting a rifle chambered in 7.62 by 39mm, the SKS is not a bad starting rifle. That's honestly the first high-powered rifle that I started out with. So let's go compare the accuracy of these two. So it's a beautiful day at the range, nice and cold, not too much wind. The ranges are mostly taken, so going to be shooting at about 70 yards here, and gonna see how the accuracy compares between the Russian and the Yugoslavian SKS. Gonna take about 10 shots each, and gonna start out with one type of target, see how that goes, compare the accuracy, and then after that I'm gonna switch up targets to something a little bit easier to see and see if that changes anything. So as you can see, at about 60 yards using the iron sights on the SKS, the groups are not all that great. Honestly, part of it is the fact that it's the iron sights, part of it's just me. Alright, now we're going to see what the Russian can do. Alright, so we switched up targets. So instead of having 4 black boxes and a center black dot, there's just going to be a circle with smaller circles and a dot. We'll see if that affects the accuracy. As you can see, the group got quite a bit better. Now, part of that's going to be I already shot 10 rounds through the SKS, so I've adjusted to the sights. Part of it's also going to be because the target is just a little bit easier to pick out the black dot, since you don't have the 4 black squares kind of vying for competition when you're trying to focus on where to aim. So let's go ahead and swap out to a fresh target, since there's quite a few holes, and we'll see how the Russian model does. So we've got the new circular target out there, and now we're going to test out the accuracy of the Russian again. Go see how we did. So it looks like my grouping is kind of high, and then a second grouping over there is a little, well, quite a ways to the right. My only guess on the top one is that the point of impact on the Yugoslavian model seems to be higher than on the Russian model, and I think I tried to compensate, thinking that it was going to have the same effect on the Russian as it was with the Yugo. But the Russian seems to be a lot more accurate in terms of grouping. If you'll notice, the group didn't really open up as much on the Russian as it did on the Yugo. The right, I'm not really sure. I mean, I hesitated a couple times, so my guess would be that would account for a couple of the flyers to the upper right, but one of them was actually on the bullseye, so it wasn't bad at all. So just some final thoughts here before I wrap up the shooting trip. The left-hand target here is the Yugo. The right hand here is the Russian. Between the two of them, you can tell the Russian tends to be a little bit more accurate. Yeah, you got this grouping in here, but then you've got these 3 flyers up here. At least with the Russian, when I thought I was having to compensate for a higher point of impact on the Russian, which wasn't the case, you still got a nice good grouping in here. Actually got a bullseye here, which is good because that's what I was aiming at. And then your group isn't too horrible here. However, it's not the greatest. And honestly, part of that's me, and part of that's just an inherent design flaw in the actual accuracy of the iron sights. There are better sights out there. That's why a lot of people prefer the aperture style sights. I think part of the reason that the groupings on the Yugo was not as good was mainly due to the fact that, for me, since I wasn't using a bench of any sort, it actually was a little bit more exhausting and harder to focus on the target, since it was more front heavy and was causing the rifle to kind of bob and weave a little bit more so than with the Russian. So between the two, they're both excellent rifles. I would honestly probably lean more towards the Russian if you're willing to put out the money for it. If you're not willing to, you can't really go wrong with the Yugo. It's a nice price for an introductory rifle that fires the 7.62 by 39mm cartridge. Alright guys, thanks for watching. This is Destroyer, signing off.